The candle flames danced on my 40th birthday cake like tiny devils, mocking everything I thought I knew about my life. Margot sat across from me at Romano's, the trendy fusion restaurant she'd insisted on booking, her manicured fingers wrapped around her phone instead of my hand. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd picked the most expensive place in town to celebrate the man whose money she was spending on another guy. "Elliott, aren't you going to make a wish?" My sister Janet nudged me, her voice cutting through the ambient chatter and clinking glasses that filled the upscale dining room. I stared at the 40 tiny flames. "What do you wish for when you already know your marriage is over? When you've spent the last 6 weeks quietly preparing for this exact moment? When the woman sitting across from you thinks she's playing chess while you're 3 moves ahead in a different game entirely?" "Just thinking about what I want most," I said, keeping my voice steady. The truth was, I'd already gotten my wish. Everything was in place. Margot's phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, and I caught the micro-expression that crossed her face, the slight widening of her eyes, the way her lips parted just enough to let out a tiny breath. Anticipation, excitement, the look of a woman receiving a text from her lover. "Sorry, honey," she said, not looking sorry at all. "Work's been crazy with the Henderson project." My mother, bless her, tried to salvage the moment. "Margot, dear, surely work can wait until after Elliott's birthday dinner." Margot's smile was practiced, perfect, and completely hollow. You know how demanding Garrett can be about deadlines. Garrett Tate, her boss, the man who'd been sending my wife flowers every Friday for the past 3 months, always with business cards attached to make it look professional. The same man who'd been taking her to client dinners that lasted until midnight. The architect who drove a silver BMW sedan and wore cologne expensive enough to linger on my wife's clothes when she came home. I knew because I'd been watching, waiting, planning. "Elliott builds cars that last decades," my father chimed in, raising his wine glass. "That's real craftsmanship." "Dad's right," I said, meeting Margot's eyes across the table. "I believe in building things that endure, things you can count on." Her phone buzzed again. This time she couldn't hide the flush that crept up her neck. "I'm so sorry, everyone, but I really need to take this work call." She stood, smoothing down her black dress, the one I'd bought her for our anniversary last year. "It'll just be a few minutes?" "Of course," I said, cutting into my steak with deliberate precision. "Take all the time you need." She leaned down and kissed my cheek, her perfume mixing with that familiar cologne scent. "Order dessert without me if the service is slow." I watched her weave between tables toward the restaurant's exit, her heels clicking against the polished hardwood floor. She moved with purpose, excitement barely contained beneath her professional facade. "She works too hard," Janet said, shaking her head. "She's dedicated," I replied, dabbing my mouth with the cloth napkin. "Always has been. Excuse me for a moment. I need some air." The thing about being married to someone for 15 years is that you learn their patterns. Margot thought she was clever, but she'd grown sloppy over the past few months. Careless. She'd started leaving her laptop open, her phone face up on the counter, her schedule loose and full of holes big enough to drive a BMW through. I'd learned that Garrett Tate was 48, divorced 2 years ago, and lived in a penthouse downtown. I'd learned that he'd been pursuing my wife since she started working at Tate & Associates 18 months ago. I'd learned that she'd been responding to his advances for the last 4 months, meeting him at hotels, restaurants, and his apartment while telling me she was working late or having dinner with clients. Most importantly, I'd learned that she planned to ask for a divorce after my birthday. She wanted the house, half my business, and alimony. She'd already consulted a lawyer, Rebecca Chen from Morrison & Associates. I knew because I'd hired a private investigator, and Tom Bradley was thorough, if nothing else. But Margot had made one crucial mistake in her planning. She'd assumed I was the same trusting, hard-working man she'd married. She'd assumed I'd roll over and let her take everything I'd built while she ran off with her rich boss. She'd assumed wrong. I stepped out into the cool October evening, the restaurant's warm light spilling onto the sidewalk behind me. The parking lot stretched before me, filled with luxury cars and SUVs belonging to Romano's wealthy clientele. I spotted the silver BMW immediately, parked in the far corner under a broken streetlight. My heart rate stayed steady as I walked across the asphalt. This wasn't anger driving me forward. It was calculation. Cold, methodical planning finally coming to fruition. The BMW's windows were tinted, but I could see 2 silhouettes inside. Margot in the passenger seat, leaning toward the driver. Garrett's profile was unmistakable. Sharp nose, perfectly styled gray hair, the kind of practiced good looks that came with expensive grooming and a gym membership. They were talking, laughing. Her hand was on his arm. I approached the passenger side and knocked on the window. The conversation inside stopped immediately. I could see Margot's face go pale in the dim light, her mouth forming a perfect O of surprise. Garrett straightened in his seat, his confident posture shifting to something more defensive. The window rolled down slowly. Margot's face appeared, her expression cycling through shock, guilt, and finally settling on a kind of desperate calculation. "Elliott, how did you—" "Happy birthday to me," I said, keeping my voice conversational. I leaned down slightly, making sure Garrett could see my face clearly. "Margot, I don't think you've properly introduced me to Garrett." "This isn't what it looks like," she started, but I held up a hand. "Actually, it's exactly what it looks like." I smiled. Not the bitter, angry expression she probably expected, but something genuinely pleased. "And I have to say, the timing couldn't be more perfect." Garrett finally spoke, his voice carrying the kind of authority he probably used in business meetings. "Listen, Elliott, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding at all." I looked directly at him, my smile widening. "She's all yours now." The silence that followed was beautiful. Perfect. I could see both of them processing my words, trying to figure out what game I was playing. "Enjoy the payments on the house you'll never live in," I added, straightening up. "What are you talking about?" Margot's voice was sharp now, cutting through the night air, but I was already walking away, my hands in my pockets, whistling softly. Behind me, I heard the car door slam, heard Margot's heels clicking rapidly against the asphalt as she tried to catch up. Elliott, wait." I didn't wait. I didn't look back. I walked into Romano's, past the hostess station, past the bar where couples shared intimate conversations over expensive wine, back to my table where my family sat waiting with concerned expressions. "Everything okay, son?" my father asked. "Better than okay," I said, picking up my fork. "Everything's exactly as it should be." Margot burst through the restaurant's entrance 30 seconds later, her face flushed, her carefully styled hair slightly disheveled. She hurried to our table, sliding into her chair with a breathless laugh. "Sorry about that." Crisis averted. She reached for her wine glass with a hand that trembled slightly. "Where were we?" I was paying the check. The waiter had already processed my credit card, the card linked to the account that was now solely in my name. Around us, my family made uncomfortable small talk, the celebration's momentum thoroughly broken. "The cake was delicious," my mother offered. "Romano's always delivers," I agreed, signing the receipt. "Some things you can count on." Margot's phone was face down on the table now, but I could see the screen lighting up with incoming messages. Garrett, no doubt, wondering what just happened, trying to figure out what I meant about the house payments. He'd find out soon enough. They both would. "Ready to head home?" I asked, standing and helping my mother with her coat. "Actually," Margot said quickly, "I think I might stay for one more drink. Decompress a little after that work crisis." "Of course," I said. "Take your time. I'll see everyone home." As we walked toward the exit, I caught sight of Margot through the window, already pulling out her phone, her fingers flying over the screen. Behind her, through the restaurant's glass front, I could see Garrett's BMW still parked in the far corner of the lot. "She seemed upset," Janet said as we reached our cars. "She'll be fine," I replied, unlocking my truck. "Margot's very adaptable. She'll figure things out." The drive home took 15 minutes. 15 minutes of my parents and sister speculating about work stress and marriage pressures. 15 minutes of me nodding and making appropriate responses while my mind ran through the timeline of what would happen next. Margot would call Garrett. They'd meet somewhere private, probably his penthouse, to discuss what I'd said. They'd try to figure out if I knew about the affair, if I was bluffing, if there was some way to salvage their plan. Tomorrow morning, Garrett's wife Sienna would receive a package containing photographs, text message screenshots, and hotel receipts. Tom Bradley had been very thorough in documenting the affair. By noon, Margot would discover that her name had been removed from our joint accounts 6 weeks ago, during what she'd been told was routine paperwork updating after my business expansion. By evening, she'd learned that the house deed had been transferred to an irrevocable trust with me as the sole beneficiary, a process I'd initiated 2 months ago using a lawyer 3 towns over. And sometime this week, she'd be served with divorce papers that had been filed yesterday afternoon. But tonight, she was still trying to figure out what game I was playing. Tonight, she still thought she had options. I pulled into our driveway, my driveway, and sat in the truck for a moment, looking at the house we'd shared for 8 years. The house she'd redecorated twice, always with expensive tastes and my money. The house she'd planned to take in the divorce, along with half of everything else I'd worked for. My phone buzzed. A text from Margot. "We need to talk when I get home," I typed back. "Take your time. I'll probably be asleep." Inside, the house felt different, lighter somehow. I walked through rooms that had been ours and realized they were just mine now. Had been mine, legally speaking, for 6 weeks. In the kitchen, I cut myself a piece of leftover birthday cake and ate it standing at the counter, looking out the window at the neighborhood where we'd built what I thought was a life together. The cake was chocolate with vanilla frosting. Sweet, but not too sweet. Perfectly balanced. Just like my revenge. Margot came home at 2 a.m, her key turning in the lock with the careful precision of someone trying not to wake a sleeping spouse. I wasn't sleeping. I was sitting in my leather chair in the living room, a glass of whiskey in my hand, and Tom Bradley's complete investigative report spread across the coffee table. The photographs were particularly illuminating. Margot and Garrett entering the Marriott downtown. Margot and Garrett at Chez Laurent, the French restaurant where I'd proposed to her 15 years ago. Margot and Garrett in his BMW, her hand on his thigh as they sat in the parking lot of her office building. Elliott? Her voice carried through the dark house, tentative and careful. In here, I called back, not bothering to hide the papers. Let her see them. The time for pretending was over. She appeared in the doorway, still wearing the black dress, her makeup slightly smudged. She'd been crying, or at least trying to. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. We need to talk, she said, moving into the room with the cautious steps of someone entering a minefield. I figured. I gestured to the chair across from me. Please sit. Make yourself comfortable. She remained standing, her arms crossed defensively. What did you mean tonight? About the house payments? I took a sip of whiskey, letting the burn settle in my throat before answering. I meant exactly what I said. Garrett's going to be making payments on a house he'll never live in. Elliott, I don't understand what you're trying to. She stopped mid-sentence as her eyes fell on the photographs scattered across the coffee table. What is this? Evidence, I said simply. Very thorough evidence. She moved closer, her face going pale as she recognized herself in the images. You had me followed? I had my suspicions confirmed. I leaned back in the chair, studying her face. Tom Bradley is quite good at his job. Former police detective, very detail-oriented. Margot sank into the chair across from me, her legs suddenly unsteady. How long have you known? Known for certain. About 6 weeks. Suspected? Much longer? I set down my whiskey glass. You weren't as careful as you thought, Margot. The late nights, the new clothes, the way you started showering immediately when you came home from your client meetings. Elliott, please, let me explain. Explain what? That you've been planning to divorce me and take half of everything I've built while you run off with your boss? I picked up another document from the table, a copy of her consultation notes with Rebecca Chen. Tom was very thorough. Your lawyer kept detailed records of your strategy sessions. The color drained completely from her face. You broke attorney-client privilege? I didn't break anything. Tom has contacts in many places, and people talk, especially when there's money involved. I leaned forward. Did you really think you could plan my destruction and I wouldn't find out? She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the evidence of her betrayal spread between us. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, harder, more calculating. Fine, you know. What do you want? Want? I laughed, the sound echoing off the walls of our living room. I don't want anything, Margot. I already have everything. What do you mean? I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street where we'd walked together countless evenings, where we'd talked about growing old together, where she'd lied to my face for months. The house deed was transferred to an irrevocable trust 6 weeks ago. Your name appears nowhere on the paperwork. That's impossible. I would have had to sign. You did sign. Remember the business expansion paperwork I asked you to notarize? The documents my lawyer needed for the new shop location? I turned back to face her. Very official-looking papers. You signed them without reading them. I watched understanding dawn on her face like a sunrise over a wasteland. The joint accounts have been consolidated into a protected trust account. The mortgage has been refinanced in my name only. Your income was removed during the routine paperwork updates you approved last month. Her hands were shaking now. Elliott, you can't. This isn't legal. It's completely legal. I had 3 different lawyers review every document. I moved back to my chair, settling in like a judge delivering a verdict. Divorce papers were filed yesterday afternoon. You'll be served within the week. You planned this. Her voice was barely a whisper. For 6 weeks, I planned this. While you were planning to destroy me, I was planning to save myself. She stood abruptly, pacing to the fireplace and back. The prenup protects assets brought into the marriage and acquired through individual effort. Since you've been committing adultery, and since all marital assets have been legally transferred to protected accounts, you're entitled to exactly nothing. I'll fight this. I'll get a better lawyer. With what money? I asked calmly. Your credit cards are linked to the joint account you no longer have access to. Your salary barely covers your car payment and personal expenses. And Garrett? I smiled. Well, Garrett's going to have his own problems very soon. What do you mean? Instead of answering, I picked up my phone and scrolled to a photo Tom had taken that afternoon. It showed a manila envelope being delivered to a luxury high-rise downtown. Sienna Tate received a very interesting package this morning. Photos, receipts, text message screenshots, everything documenting her husband's affair with his employee. Margot's face went white. You didn't. I did. Sienna Tate is not the forgiving type, according to Tom's research. She's also not the type to quietly accept being humiliated. Her divorce lawyer is reportedly even more ruthless than yours. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Margot stared at me as if seeing me for the first time, trying to reconcile the man she thought she'd married with the person sitting across from her. You're destroying everything, she finally said. No, I corrected. You destroyed everything. I'm just making sure you don't profit from the destruction. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it and smiled. That's Tom. Garrett just received divorce papers. Apparently Sienna worked very quickly once she saw the evidence. Margot sank back into her chair, her head in her hands. What happens now? Now you figure out your next move. You can stay in the guest room tonight if you need time to make arrangements, but this is no longer your home. Elliott, please what? Please forgive you. Please pretend the last 4 months didn't happen. Please let you take half of everything I've worked for so you can start a new life with the man you chose over me? She looked up, tears finally starting to flow. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration, of a plan falling apart, of consequences she hadn't anticipated. I never meant for it to happen this way, she said. You meant for it to happen exactly this way. You just didn't mean to get caught. I stood and gathered the photographs and documents from the coffee table. I'm going to bed. In my bedroom, in my house. You can see yourself out, or you can use the guest room. Your choice. As I reached the doorway, she called after me. What about 15 years of marriage? Doesn't that mean anything to you? I paused, considering the question. 15 years of building a life together. 15 years of trust, partnership, shared dreams. 15 years that she'd been willing to throw away for a man with a luxury car and a corner office. It meant everything to me, I said without turning around. That's why this hurts so much, and that's why I'm not going to let you profit from destroying it. I left her sitting in the living room, surrounded by the ruins of her plans, and went upstairs to sleep in my own bed, in my own house, for the first time in months without wondering where my wife really was. The next morning, I woke to the sound of the guest room shower running. Margot was still here, still trying to figure out her next move. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, reading the morning news on my tablet like it was any other day. She appeared 20 minutes later, dressed in jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked younger this way, more like the woman I'd married. But the resemblance was superficial. The person I'd married wouldn't have done what she'd done. I called Rebecca Chen, she said, pouring herself coffee. She thinks we can challenge the trust transfer. She can try. I didn't look up from my tablet. But she'll be fighting an uphill battle against 3 lawyers who spent weeks making sure everything was ironclad. Elliott, this is insane. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. Can we? I finally looked at her. Can we work out 4 months of lying? Can we work out you planning to take half my business? Can we work out you choosing another man over me? She sat across from me at the table where we'd shared thousands of meals, where we'd planned vacations and discussed dreams and made the small decisions that build a marriage. I made a mistake, she said. You made a choice. Multiple choices over multiple months? This wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy. My phone rang. Tom Bradley's name appeared on the screen. Excuse me, I said, answering the call. Tom, what's the update? Garrett Tate was served with papers this morning. His wife's lawyer is seeking immediate asset freezing and emergency spousal support. Looks like she's going for everything. And his job? That's the interesting part. Sienna Tate sits on the board of directors for Tate and Associates. It's a family business, her family. Garrett married into it. I looked across the table at Margot, who was straining to hear the conversation. So, his career prospects are non-existent. Word is he'll be lucky to keep his architect's license, let alone his position at the firm. Thanks, Tom. Send me your final invoice. I hung up and looked at Margot, who had gone very still. Garrett's been fired, I said conversationally. Turns out his wife owns the company he worked for. That's impossible. He's a partner. He's a partner by marriage, not by merit. And since the marriage is over, I shrugged. Well, you picked an interesting time to hitch your wagon to his star. She stared at me, the full scope of the situation finally becoming clear. You knew this would happen. I researched this would happen. There's a difference. So what now? Garrett and I are both supposed to just disappear? Start over with nothing? You're supposed to live with the consequences of your choices. I finished my coffee and stood. I'm going to work. I have a business to run. My business, which will continue to thrive because it's built on honest work and fair dealing. Elliott? The guest room is available for one more night if you need it. After that, you'll need to make other arrangements. I left her sitting at the kitchen table, staring into her coffee cup like it might contain answers to questions she should have asked herself months ago. At the shop, my employees greeted me the same way they always did. They didn't know about Margot's affair, about the divorce papers, about the careful destruction of my marriage. To them, I was the same Elliott who'd built the business from nothing, who treated them fairly, who took pride in honest work. But I wasn't the same Elliott. The man who'd trusted blindly was gone, replaced by someone who verified everything, who planned for betrayal, who understood that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones most capable of destroying you. My phone buzzed throughout the day with messages from Margot. Pleading messages, angry messages, desperate messages. I read them all, but responded to none. By evening, when I returned home, the guest room was empty. Margot's clothes were gone from our closet, her toiletries removed from our bathroom. She'd left her key on the kitchen counter along with a note. This isn't over. I won't let you destroy my life because you can't handle the truth about our marriage. I crumpled the note and threw it away. She still didn't understand. I wasn't destroying her life. I was simply refusing to let her destroy mine. That night, I sat in the living room with a glass of whiskey, looking at the photographs Tom had taken of my wife with another man. Tomorrow, those photographs would become evidence in divorce proceedings. Tomorrow, the legal machinery I'd set in motion would continue grinding forward. But tonight, for the first time in months, I was alone in my own house, free from lies and pretense and the exhausting work of pretending I didn't know what I knew. It felt like the first honest moment I'd had in years. 3 weeks later, I was rebuilding a 1967 Mustang engine when my lawyer called with an update that made me smile for the first time since my birthday dinner. Elliott, you need to hear this, David Morrison said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a man who'd just won a particularly challenging case. Margot's lawyer withdrew from representation this morning. I set down my wrench and wiped my hands on a shop rag. Rebecca Chen quit? Officially, she cited irreconcilable differences in legal strategy. Unofficially, word is that Margot couldn't pay her retainer for the extended litigation she was demanding. And Garrett. Garrett Tate is facing his own problems. Sienna's divorce is moving forward aggressively, and she's claiming he used company resources to conduct his affair. Corporate credit cards for hotel rooms, company car for personal meetings, using office space for personal communications. I leaned against the workbench, processing this information. So he's looking at more than just divorce? Potentially. Sienna's pushing for criminal charges. Embezzlement, fraud, misuse of corporate assets. She's not just taking him down, she's making sure he stays down. Through the shop window, I could see Main Street bustling with afternoon traffic. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of the careful destruction happening in boardrooms and law offices across town. What's Margot's next move? I asked. That's the interesting part. She's been trying to reconcile with you. I laughed, the sound echoing off the shop's metal walls. Reconcile? She's telling people the affair was a mistake, that she wants to work things out, that you're being unreasonable in your demands. My demands? Apparently, you're the villain in her version of events, the controlling husband who won't forgive a simple indiscretion. I thought about this for a moment. Margot was rewriting history, casting herself as the repentant wife and me as the unforgiving husband. It was a smart strategy, if anyone was buying it. How's that working out for her? Not well. Tom Bradley's photographs are very compelling evidence. Hard to claim a 4-month affair was a momentary lapse in judgment. After I hung up, I went back to work on the Mustang. There was something deeply satisfying about rebuilding an engine, taking something broken and making it better than new. Every part had a purpose. Every connection mattered. And when you were done, you had something reliable. Unlike marriage, apparently. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. This has gone far enough. M. I deleted the message without responding. An hour later, another text. I know you're getting my messages. Be an adult about this. Delete. Then, fine. If you won't talk to me, I'll come to the shop. I looked up from the engine, considering this threat. Margot showing up at my workplace would be interesting. My employees knew something was wrong. I'd been working longer hours, staying focused on tasks that usually would have been delegated, but they didn't know the details. 20 minutes later, her BMW pulled into the shop's parking lot. Through the window, I watched her sit in the car for several minutes, probably rehearsing whatever speech she'd prepared. Finally, she got out and walked toward the entrance, her heels clicking against the concrete. She was dressed professionally, navy suit, hairstyled, makeup perfect. She looked like she was going to a business meeting, which in a way she was. Elliott? Her voice carried across the shop floor. My 3 employees, Mike, Tommy, and Jake, all looked up from their work. I could see the curiosity in their faces, the questions they were too polite to ask. In the office, I called back, not wanting this conversation to happen in front of my staff. She followed me into the small office at the back of the shop, closing the door behind her. The space felt cramped with both of us in it, too intimate for the strangers we'd become. You look good, she said, which was a lie. I looked like a man who'd been working 16-hour days to avoid going home to an empty house. What do you want, Margot? I want to fix this. I want to fix us. I sat behind my desk, putting the physical barrier between us. There is no us to fix. Elliott, please. I made a mistake. Stop calling it a mistake. My voice was sharper than I'd intended. Mistakes are accidental. What you did was deliberate, calculated, and sustained over months. She moved closer to the desk, leaning forward in a gesture that was probably meant to be intimate but felt manipulative. I was confused. Garrett was charming, attentive. Garrett was married, and so were you. I know that. I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry. But we can work through this. 15 years of marriage is worth fighting for. I studied her face, looking for any sign of genuine remorse. What I saw instead was desperation. Not the desperation of a woman who'd lost the love of her life, but the desperation of someone whose backup plan had fallen through. Where's Garrett now? I asked. She hesitated. That's not relevant. He's living in a studio apartment downtown, working as a freelance architect for a firm that pays him a third of what he was making. His wife took everything, the house, the cars, the savings, the business. He can barely afford his own rent, let alone yours. Her face flushed. How do you know that? I make it my business to know, just like I made it my business to know about your affair before I confronted you. So this is about revenge? This is about consequences. I leaned back in my chair. You chose Garrett over me when you thought he was successful, wealthy, established. Now that he's none of those things, you want to come back to the stable option. That's not... I realized I made a mistake. You realized your plan A fell through and you need a plan B. The silence stretched between us, filled with the sounds of work continuing outside the office door. My employees were rebuilding engines, fixing transmissions, solving problems with their hands and their skills. Honest work that produced tangible results. What do you want me to say? She finally asked. I don't want you to say anything. I want you to leave. Elliott, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. I'm being more reasonable than you deserve. I stood, moving toward the door. You made your choice. Live with it. I can't live with it. The mask slipped, revealing the desperation underneath. I can't afford my apartment without your support. I can't maintain my lifestyle. Your lifestyle? I stared at her. Your lifestyle was built on my money while you were planning to leave me for another man. Why would you think you're entitled to maintain it? Because I'm your wife? You're my soon-to-be ex-wife. There's a difference. She was crying now. Real tears this time, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration, of a plan gone wrong, of consequences she hadn't anticipated. Please, she whispered. I have nowhere else to go. For a moment, I felt something that might have been sympathy. This was the woman I'd loved for 15 years, the woman I'd planned to grow old with. Seeing her broken and desperate should have moved me. But then I remembered the photographs, the lies, the months of planning my destruction while smiling at me across the dinner table. You should have thought about that before you decided our marriage was disposable. I opened the office door, making it clear the conversation was over. She stood there for a moment, probably hoping I'd change my mind, probably calculating whether tears or anger would be more effective. Finally, she walked past me toward the exit. At the door, she turned back. This isn't over, Elliott. I won't just disappear because it's convenient for you. You already disappeared, I said. 4 months ago, when you chose someone else. I'm just making it official. After she left, I went back to work on the Mustang. Mike approached me cautiously, clearly wanting to ask questions, but not sure if he should. "Everything okay, boss?" "Everything's fine, Mike. Just some personal business to sort out." He nodded and went back to his work, but I could feel the curiosity from all three of them. Small-town shops are like small towns themselves. Everyone knows everyone's business eventually. That evening, I drove home to my empty house and made dinner for one. The silence that had once felt oppressive now felt peaceful. No lies to navigate, no pretense to maintain, no wondering where my wife really was or who she was really with. My phone rang during dinner, Janet's name on the screen. "Hey, sis." "Elliott, I just heard from Mom. Margot called her today." I set down my fork. "What did she say?" "That you're being unreasonable about the divorce, that she made a mistake, but you won't even consider counseling, that she's afraid you're having some kind of breakdown." "And what did Mom say?" "Mom told her that if she was concerned about your mental health, she probably shouldn't have been unfaithful to you for 4 months. I smiled. My mother had never been one to mince words. "Margot's trying to control the narrative," I said, making herself the victim. "Is it working?" "Not with anyone who matters." "Good, because what she did to you was unforgivable." After dinner, I sat in the living room with a beer, thinking about Margot's visit to the shop. Her desperation had been real, but it wasn't desperation to save our marriage. It was desperation to save herself from the consequences of destroying it. She'd gambled everything on Garrett, and when that bet failed, she'd tried to return to the safe option. But some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. My phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. "I hope you're happy. You've destroyed everything we built together." This time I responded, "You destroyed it. I just refuse to pay for the demolition." The response came immediately. "I hate you." I typed back, "I know. That's why this was necessary." Then I blocked the number and finished my beer in peace. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. Families settling in for the evening in houses they owned together, marriages built on trust and mutual respect, everything I'd thought I had, everything I'd lost, everything I'd fought to protect. Tomorrow, the divorce proceedings would continue. Tomorrow, Margot would have to face the reality of her choices without the safety net of my forgiveness or my money. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged, in my own house, free from lies, planning nothing more complicated than what to have for breakfast. It was the most honest I'd felt in years. 6 months after my birthday dinner revelation, I stood in Judge Patricia Hammond's courtroom watching my marriage officially dissolve into legal language and financial settlements. Margot sat at the plaintiff's table with her new lawyer, a young public defender who'd taken her case pro bono, probably hoping for publicity from what the local paper had dubbed the birthday betrayal divorce. The courtroom was nearly empty except for the required parties. No family members, no friends showing support. Just lawyers, a court reporter, and 2 people who'd once promised to love each other forever. "Mr. Monroe," Judge Hammond said, reviewing the settlement documents, "you're agreeing to transfer $5,000 to Ms. Monroe for relocation expenses?" "Yes, Your Honor." It was a token amount, enough to rent a small apartment and buy basic furniture, but nowhere near the comfortable settlement Margot had originally planned to extract from our divorce. "And Ms. Monroe, you're waiving all claims to marital property, business assets, and spousal support?" Margot's new lawyer, a fresh-faced kid named Brian Walsh, leaned over to whisper something to her. She nodded reluctantly. "Yes, Your Honor." "And you understand this waiver is permanent and irrevocable?" Another whispered consultation. "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Hammond signed the papers with the efficient movements of someone who dissolved hundreds of marriages. "The court finds the settlement fair and equitable, given the circumstances. The marriage of Elliott Monroe and Margot Monroe is hereby dissolved." Just like that, 15 years reduced to a signature on legal documents. Outside the courthouse, Margot's lawyer shook my hand with the professional courtesy of someone who knew he'd been outmaneuvered from the start. "Your attorney did excellent work on the asset protection," he said. "Very thorough." "David Morrison is the best in the state," I agreed. Margot stood on the courthouse steps, looking lost. She'd lost weight over the past 6 months, and her clothes, once perfectly tailored, now hung loose on her frame. The confident, successful architect I'd married had been replaced by someone who looked defeated. "Elliott," she called as I walked toward my truck. I stopped but didn't turn around. "What is it, Margot?" "I just want you to know, I really did love you. Once." I turned to face her, studying the woman who'd shared my life for 15 years. "I know you did. That's what makes this so sad." "Then why?" "Because loving someone once doesn't give you the right to destroy them later." I left her standing on the courthouse steps and drove back to work, where Mike and Tommy were installing a new transmission in a customer's pickup truck. Normal work, honest work. the kind of straightforward problem-solving that made sense in a world where nothing else seemed to. "How'd it go, boss?" Mike asked. "It's finished," I said, and went back to rebuilding engines. That evening, I had dinner at Romano's, the same restaurant where everything had started 6 months earlier. I sat at the bar instead of requesting a table, ordering the steak I'd been eating when my wife excused herself to meet her lover. "Celebrating something?" the bartender asked, noticing my unusually good mood. "Freedom," I said, raising my glass. The irony wasn't lost on me. 6 months ago, I'd sat in this restaurant thinking my life was falling apart. Tonight, I realized it had actually been falling together, into a shape that made more sense, built on truth instead of lies. My phone buzzed with a text from David Morrison. "Congratulations on your freedom. Invoice attached. Worth every penny." He was right. The legal fees had been substantial, but they'd been an investment in my future, a future where I wouldn't have to wonder if the person sleeping next to me was planning my destruction. As I finished dinner, I thought about Margot's parting words on the courthouse steps. She'd loved me once, and I'd loved her completely. But love without trust is just sentiment, and sentiment without respect is just manipulation. She'd chosen to destroy what we'd built together, gambling that she could profit from the destruction. I'd chosen to protect what I'd worked for, ensuring that betrayal wouldn't be rewarded with wealth. We'd both gotten exactly what we'd chosen. The next morning, I woke up in my house, legally, officially, irrevocably mine, and made coffee for one. The silence that had once felt lonely now felt peaceful. No more wondering, no more pretending, no more careful navigation around lies and half-truths. My phone rang. Tom Bradley's name on the screen. "Elliott, thought you'd want to know. Garrett Tate filed for bankruptcy yesterday." "Both of them?" "Both of them. Margot's bankruptcy filing will probably go through next month. Turns out her new apartment and lifestyle were being funded by credit cards." I poured my coffee and sat at the kitchen table, processing this information. So they're both starting over with nothing. Nothing except each other, apparently. Word is they're back together, sharing a one-bedroom apartment downtown. I thought about this for a moment. Margot and Garrett, the ambitious architect and the successful businessman, reduced to sharing a cramped apartment and struggling to pay basic bills. They'd gambled everything on their affair and lost everything in the process. Poetic justice, I said. That's one way to look at it. Another way is that they got exactly what they deserved. After Tom hung up, I sat in my kitchen drinking coffee and reading the morning news. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up, families starting their days, people heading to jobs, the ordinary rhythm of honest lives. At the shop, I had 3 cars to finish and 2 new customers coming in for estimates. Real work, solving real problems, building something that would last. Unlike my marriage, apparently. But that was okay. I'd learned something valuable from the wreckage of my 15-year relationship. Some things are worth fighting for, and some fights are worth winning. My phone buzzed with one final text from Margot's old number. "I hope you're happy with what you've done." I typed back, "I'm happy with what I've saved." Then I blocked the number permanently and got back to work. 6 months later, I was exactly where I'd planned to be, in my own house, running my own business, free from lies and manipulation and the exhausting work of loving someone who was planning to destroy me. It wasn't the life I'd imagined when I married Margot 15 years ago, but it was an honest life, built on truth instead of pretense. And that made all the difference. Some stories end with reconciliation and forgiveness. This one ended with justice and peace. And sometimes that's exactly the ending you need.